I am Donna Mitchell, 58 years old, a retired teacher living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Omaha, Nebraska. Every week, my sister-in-law would visit my husband. I had installed a hidden camera, and then what I saw on my phone left me speechless, forcing me to pull over and call 911. 45 minutes later, everything changed. It started so quietly. My husband Thomas, 62, a retired engineer, had always been the steady one in our marriage. We built a simple life here after he retired, mornings with coffee on the porch, evenings watching the neighborhood kids ride bikes down our street. Then, a few months ago, Thomas began feeling off. He complained of constant fatigue and sudden dizzy spells that made him grab the kitchen counter for support. At first, we thought it was just age catching up, maybe stress from adjusting to retirement. He saw our local doctor, ran some basic tests, but nothing showed up clearly. The symptoms kept coming back stronger. I tried to stay positive, handling the house and his appointments while he rested more, but the visits from his sister Pamela started increasing around the same time. She would show up every week, offering to help with his medication and daily routines, saying she just wanted to support her big brother. Thomas appreciated it. He trusted her completely. I never imagined one simple decision, setting up that small hidden camera, would reveal something so shocking. What happened next tore through our family in ways I still struggle to process. If you enjoy real family drama stories with unexpected twists and hard lessons, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below. What would you do if someone close kept visiting your sick spouse every week? Let me know. Now, back to what really happened. A few weeks passed, and the fatigue Thomas felt refused to fade away. Pamela began stopping by our house every week, always with the same cheerful explanation that she wanted to help her big brother through this rough patch. At first, I welcomed her presence. She was his only sister, after all, and family should support one another during tough times. I even felt a sense of relief that someone else could share the load of keeping track of his appointments and making sure he took everything on schedule. Pamela arrived like clockwork every Wednesday afternoon, parking her silver sedan in the driveway and walking up with her usual bright smile. She carried a small tote bag filled with fresh fruit, herbal teas, and whatever vitamins she thought might give Thomas more energy. I read online that these can really make a difference for someone your age, she would say while unpacking everything on the kitchen counter. I smiled and thanked her each time, appreciating how thoughtful she seemed toward her older brother. Thomas lit up whenever she walked through the door. He trusted her completely, maybe because they had grown up together and shared so many memories from their childhood in the same neighborhood just outside Omaha. As the visits continued week after week, Thomas started relying on Pamela more and more for his daily care. He asked her to organize his pill bottles neatly on the counter and even let her prepare his supplements each time she came over. Pamela knows what she's doing, he told me one evening after she had left for the day. It feels good to have her here helping out with all of this. I nodded along, not wanting to question his comfort or make him feel like I was doubting his sister. After all, she was blood-related, and I had my own hands full managing the household bills, answering insurance questions over the phone, and taking care of our small backyard garden that needed constant attention in the Nebraska weather. One particular Wednesday stood out because Pamela spent nearly 2 hours in the kitchen carefully mixing different powders into his morning routine. She explained each step in detail to Thomas, who sat at the table watching her, showing him the labels on the containers and talking about how these combinations could help boost his immune system and reduce the dizziness he kept experiencing. He listened intently, asking her questions about the ingredients and laughing at the jokes she made about their old family stories from when they were kids. I stayed in the living room sorting through a stack of mail, but I could hear their easy conversation drifting down the hallway. It felt normal at the time, like any sibling catching up while lending a helpful hand during a difficult period. Nicholas dropped in unexpectedly that same week on a Friday evening after finishing his shift. Our son lived only 30 minutes away in a nearby suburb, so he often stopped by after work to check on us without calling ahead. He found Thomas resting on the couch in the living room while Pamela finished tidying up the kitchen from her earlier visit that day. Nicholas greeted his aunt politely with a quick hug, then pulled me aside into the hallway for a quick private word. "Mom, something feels off about how often Aunt Pamela is here lately," he said in a low voice so no one else could hear. "It's nice she wants to help Dad, but the way she takes over his medication routine every single time, I don't know. It just seems a bit much for someone who isn't living here." I brushed it off lightly at the moment, telling him his father really appreciated the company and that Pamela was only trying to be supportive of his family. Nicholas didn't push the issue any further that evening, but his comments stayed with me long after he left later that night and drove back to his place. The following weeks settled into what felt like a steady new pattern in our home. Pamela's visits quickly became the highlight of Thomas's week. He looked forward to her arrival, sometimes even calling her the night before to confirm exactly what time she would come by. She continued preparing his supplements with the same careful attention, measuring out precise scoops and stirring them into his water glass or plain yogurt, without rushing. Thomas praised her efforts openly during dinner, saying he felt a little steadier on his feet on the days she had helped him earlier. I kept any growing doubts to myself, choosing instead to focus on cooking his favorite simple meals like grilled chicken and vegetables, and making sure he got enough rest in between her stops at the house. During another visit later that month, Pamela suggested they sit together at the dining table to review his most recent lab results that had come in the mail. She pulled out her phone and compared the numbers side by side with him, offering her own opinions on what the doctor might have overlooked in the report. Thomas leaned in closely, looking engaged and genuinely grateful for her input on the whole situation. I watched quietly from the doorway leading into the kitchen, noticing how naturally she stepped into the role of someone helping manage his daily health needs. Part of me still felt grateful that Thomas had this extra layer of family support, especially since our daughter Hannah lived so far away in California and could only check in through occasional video calls on weekends. Nicholas visited again 2 weeks later, this time on a Sunday afternoon when the weather had turned cooler. He brought bags of takeout food for all of us from a local restaurant we liked and sat with his father in the living room while Pamela was still there finishing up her tasks for the day. After she finally left and drove away, Nicholas helped me clear the table in the kitchen and spoke to me quietly once more. "I'm not trying to cause any problems between family members, but Dad seems to let Aunt Pamela handle almost everything related to his health routine now," he said carefully. "It's like he trusts her suggestions more than the actual doctors sometimes when it comes to what he should be taking." I assured him we were keeping a close eye on the situation overall, and that his father appeared to be in good hands with the extra help. Still, his observation added another small layer of unease that I tried hard to push aside for the time being. Pamela never missed a single one of her weekly visits, no matter how busy her own schedule seemed to be. She adapted her plans around Thomas's needs without complaint, sometimes staying an extra hour if he mentioned having a particularly difficult day with balance issues or tiredness. Their conversations during those afternoons often turned back to old family memories from decades ago, which seemed to lift Thomas's spirits and make him more talkative than usual. He began deferring to her suggestions about small adjustments in his supplement timing or trying new items she had found recommended on various health websites. I continued handling all the bigger responsibilities in the background, dealing with insurance paperwork over the phone, making regular grocery runs to the store, and keeping the entire house running smoothly while allowing her to focus on the specific daily health details she seemed eager to manage. As more time went on, Thomas's dependence on Pamela's consistent help became increasingly noticeable in our daily life. He would sometimes wait until she arrived before taking his afternoon dose, mentioning casually that it felt better when she prepared everything fresh for him. Pamela always obliged with her usual warm smile, never once complaining about the drive from her place or the time it took out of her day. I repeatedly told myself this was simply what family members did for one another, especially when someone close wasn't feeling their best and needed extra assistance. The new routine felt mostly stable on the surface, even if that quiet voice in the back of my mind continued to wonder occasionally why she had become so deeply involved in our lives so quickly after Thomas first mentioned his symptoms. Nicholas made one more quick stop midweek toward the end of the month, this time just to grab a few tools from the garage for a project at his own home. He noticed Pamela's car parked in the driveway again and gave me a brief knowing look as he passed through the kitchen on his way out. Still keeping the same tight schedule. He muttered under his breath before heading back to his truck. I changed the subject right away by asking about his job instead, not wanting to dwell on his repeated concerns at that moment. Thomas, for his part, continued to speak highly of his sister's dedication and reliability whenever the two of us talked alone about how his days had been going lately. The pattern held steady and consistent through the rest of that month without any major changes. Pamela's regular presence provided a clear sense of structure for Thomas while he dealt with his ongoing symptoms that refused to improve much. He grew noticeably more relaxed and open around her during the visits, sharing more details about exactly how he felt each day and willingly letting her make small adjustments to his personal care plan. I maintained my usual supportive role quietly in the background, making sure meals were prepared on time and the house stayed comfortable and organized for everyone. Our overall family dynamic had shifted in subtle but clear ways over those weeks, with Pamela stepping deeper into the daily responsibilities that surrounded Thomas's health management. 1 month later, the situation took a sharper turn. Thomas's symptoms grew noticeably worse almost overnight. The dizzy spells that used to come once or twice a day now hit him multiple times without warning, sometimes leaving him unsteady even when he held onto the edge of the table or the back of a chair for support. He started needing help to walk from the bedroom to the living room on most mornings, and simple tasks like making a cup of coffee or picking up the newspaper left him exhausted and short of breath within minutes. Our local doctor in Omaha ordered more blood work and scans, but the results still showed nothing conclusive that could explain the rapid decline. I could see the growing worry in Thomas's eyes, even though he tried hard to downplay everything, telling me repeatedly that it was probably just a temporary setback from adjusting to retirement life. That weekend, Hannah called on video from her apartment in California. Our daughter looked visibly concerned the moment her face appeared on the screen. Her eyebrows furrowed as she leaned closer to the camera. She asked a long series of detailed questions about how her father had been feeling over the past few weeks, wanting to know exactly how often the dizziness occurred, whether he was sleeping through the night, and if he was managing to eat regular meals without feeling nauseous. I described the latest episodes as calmly as I could manage, mentioning how he had trouble standing for long periods even with support and how tired he seemed even after resting for several hours during the day. Hannah listened carefully without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each new detail I shared. "Mom, this doesn't sound right at all," she said, her voice firm and urgent across the distance. "Dad was always so active and independent, even after he retired from engineering. Something is changing way too fast, and you need to start questioning everything that is happening around him right now before it gets any worse." She paused for a long moment, then added quietly but with clear emphasis, "Especially with how much time Aunt Pamela is spending there lately. I know she's family and means well, but you should pay much closer attention to what's really going on during those visits and exactly who is influencing his daily routine and decisions." Her words stayed with me long after we ended the call, repeating in my head during quiet moments around the house. I began keeping a more careful mental note of exactly when Pamela arrived each time and how long she actually stayed during each visit. The pattern that had seemed manageable before was becoming harder and harder to ignore as the weeks went on. What had started as a single afternoon visit had now stretched into much longer sessions that sometimes filled most of the day, with Pamela texting Thomas the night before to confirm every detail and him replying almost immediately with enthusiasm. I found myself watching from the kitchen window more often as her familiar car pulled into the driveway on days that were no longer limited to the original schedule, the increase feeling both sudden and difficult to explain, especially since Thomas's overall condition continued its steady decline instead of showing any signs of real improvement. I started noticing small but consistent changes in the way Pamela interacted whenever she stopped by the house. She often brought new bottles of supplements she claimed would provide better support for energy levels and balance issues, placing them carefully on the kitchen counter and taking time to explain their supposed benefits to Thomas in great detail. She would sit with him at the dining table for extended periods, spreading out lists of ingredients and suggesting careful adjustments to his daily intake based on articles and forums she had read recently. Thomas listened closely to every suggestion, nodding along thoughtfully and sometimes asking her to write down the updated schedule so he could follow it precisely without missing any steps. I stayed busy with various household chores in other parts of the house, but I couldn't help overhearing longer fragments of their conversations about how certain combinations of vitamins and minerals might help improve his symptoms much faster than waiting for the doctor's next set of recommendations alone. As yet, another week passed without any positive change in Thomas's health. The frequency of Pamela's visits became even more noticeable and pronounced than before. She began showing up on additional days beyond the usual Wednesday afternoon, offering simple excuses such as having some unexpected free time and wanting to check on her older brother to make sure he was doing okay. Thomas never seemed to question the extra visits at all. Instead, he appeared genuinely comforted by her increased presence in our home, telling me in private conversations that having his sister around during this difficult period made the long days feel more manageable and far less lonely than they otherwise would. I tried my best to remain outwardly supportive, continuing to prepare balanced meals and keep the house running smoothly as usual, but Hannah's direct warning from the video call kept echoing strongly in my thoughts every single time I noticed Pamela's car parked in the driveway once again. One quiet evening after Pamela had finally left for the day and the sun had gone down, I sat alone in the living room while Thomas rested in the bedroom with the door slightly ajar. My mind kept turning back to the lake house that Thomas had inherited outright from his parents many years earlier. The property was located on a peaceful shoreline about 2 hours north of Omaha, featuring a small wooden dock, shaded trees, and plenty of open space that had always been perfect for relaxed family gatherings during warmer months. Pamela had started mentioning the lake house more casually during her recent visits, asking Thomas specific questions about how he was managing the basic upkeep and whether he had given any thought to future plans for the property now that his health made traveling more challenging. At the time, those questions had seemed harmless enough, but now they carried a heavier weight and came up more frequently in conversation. Why was she suddenly showing such detailed interest in the specifics of a property that had remained solely in Thomas's name since his parents had passed away? I decided to pull out our old family photo albums one slow afternoon while Thomas was napping on the couch in the living room. I spent time flipping slowly through page after page of pictures from gatherings at the lake house over the years, noticing how Pamela appeared in many of the shots, always smiling warmly beside her brother during summer barbecues, boat rides on the water, and casual evenings around the fire pit. The images brought back clear memories of how close the siblings had been while growing up together. Yet something about her recent and repeated focus on the property now felt distinctly out of place when considered alongside Thomas's ongoing and worsening health struggles. I closed the heavy album carefully and stared out the front window toward the quiet suburban street outside, trying to understand why her attention appeared to be divided between genuinely trying to help him feel better and inquiring so often about the house he had owned alone for so long. Hannah called again a few days later, choosing an earlier evening slot when Thomas was already resting comfortably. She repeated her concerns in even more direct terms this time, strongly urging me to start documenting every single thing I noticed during Pamela's visits, including any passing comments or questions about the lake house or any subtle shifts in how his daily supplements and routines were being handled. "Mom, you really need to trust your own instincts on this one," she said, her voice filled with clear worry that traveled clearly through the phone line. "If the visits keep increasing at the same time Dad's condition keeps getting worse, you owe it to both yourself and to him to look much closer and take steps to protect what truly matters most for your future together." I promised her sincerely that I would stay as alert as possible and pay careful attention to every new detail that arose, although I still found it difficult to voice my growing private suspicions out loud, directly to Thomas himself. He continued speaking in positive terms about his sister's reliable support whenever we had quiet moments alone, often mentioning how much her regular presence helped him feel less isolated on the particularly bad days, and how truly grateful he felt for the time she was willingly devoting. The days began to blend together into a continuous stretch as Thomas's condition kept sliding downward without any medical explanation that made sense. He ended up spending increasing amounts of time either resting on the couch in the living room or staying in bed for longer periods, and Pamela's silver car became an almost constant familiar sight parked in our driveway several times throughout the week, with some visits extending well into the late afternoon hours. I caught myself checking the clock on the wall far more often than usual, carefully noting the exact number of hours she spent inside our home and the way Thomas had started to rely more heavily on her input, even for relatively small everyday decisions about his comfort. My unanswered questions about her growing and repeated interest in the details of the lake house continued to linger quietly in the back of my mind, becoming steadily more intertwined with the constant underlying worry about why Thomas's health showed no signs of stabilizing, no matter how much extra attention and care he seemed to be receiving on a regular basis. 2 weeks after that conversation, I reached a decision I never thought I would have to make. The unease had built up steadily inside me until it became impossible to ignore any longer. I spent several quiet mornings sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, researching small, discreet recording devices that could be placed without drawing any attention from visitors. I read through dozens of product reviews from people who had faced similar family situations, comparing features like battery life, video quality, and how well the devices blended into everyday home environments. After narrowing down the options, I chose a compact model designed to look exactly like an ordinary electrical outlet adapter. It promised to blend seamlessly into any wall socket and could send live footage directly to my phone through a secure, password-protected app. The price was reasonable, and the delivery was promised for the next day, which gave me little time to second-guess the choice. When the small, plain box finally arrived at our doorstep the following afternoon, I waited until Thomas was taking his usual afternoon nap in the bedroom before carrying it quietly into the garage to open it. The device inside was even smaller and more unassuming than the pictures had shown, coming with a short set of clear instructions for quick setup and connection. I practiced pairing it with my phone multiple times on the workbench, making sure the app installed correctly, and the live feed appeared without delays or glitches. My hands felt slightly unsteady during the process, but I kept reminding myself that this was simply a practical step to gain some clarity about what was happening in our home when I stepped out of the room for even a short time. I chose a spot on the wall in the living room near the main seating area, right beside the couch where Pamela usually sat with Thomas at the low coffee table during her visits. The electrical outlet in that exact location was rarely used for anything else, which made the adapter look completely ordinary and natural once plugged in. I inserted the device carefully, adjusted the hidden lens angle several times until it had a wide, unobstructed view of both the coffee table and the nearby kitchen counter where supplement bottles were often handled and prepared. After testing the connection one final time and confirming that the app on my phone displayed a sharp, real-time image of the entire area, I removed all the original packaging, cut it into small pieces, and buried it deep inside the recycling bin outside behind the garage so no trace remained visible. That same afternoon, once the installation was fully complete and tested, Pamela arrived for her regular weekly visit. This was the very first time she had come over since the camera had been placed and activated in the living room. I greeted her at the front door with my usual polite smile and mentioned casually that I needed to run to the local grocery store for a few basic items we were running low on at home. "Take all the time you need," she replied in her cheerful tone as she stepped past me into the house. "I'll stay here and keep Thomas company, making sure he stays comfortable and relaxed while you handle the errands." Thomas waved lightly from his spot on the couch, looking content as he settled in for what he expected would be another normal conversation with his sister. I picked up my purse and car keys from the hallway table, then drove the short 10-minute distance to the neighborhood supermarket. Rather than rushing through the shopping list, I moved slowly up and down the aisles, selecting milk, fresh bread, eggs, and several types of vegetables while keeping my phone within easy reach in my jacket pocket. The app remained open in the background, allowing me to check the live feed discreetly whenever I paused in a quiet section of the store away from other shoppers. During the first 20 minutes or so, the footage showed only ordinary, everyday activity inside the house, Pamela sitting and chatting with Thomas about light, everyday topics while occasionally adjusting a pillow for his comfort behind his back. Nothing out of the ordinary stood out right away. As I continued my slow walk through the produce section, selecting ripe tomatoes and leafy greens, I glanced down at the phone screen again. Pamela had now moved from the couch to the coffee table area and was actively handling several of the supplement bottles that Thomas kept lined up there. She arranged the containers in a neat row in front of her, then reached into her own bag and pulled out a small measuring spoon. With focused movements, she began portioning out precise amounts of different powders, mixing them carefully into a clear glass of water on the table. She stirred the mixture slowly and thoroughly while continuing to talk with Thomas in a calm voice about how this particular new combination could potentially help him feel more stable and reduce the unsteadiness he had been experiencing. The camera, positioned perfectly on the wall, captured every single motion and detail clearly without any interruption or loss of quality. I completed the rest of my shopping list and paid at the self-checkout lane, my thoughts racing with the images I had just witnessed on the small phone screen in real time. The drive back home felt noticeably longer than the usual short trip, even though the actual distance had not changed. When I finally pulled the car into our driveway, Pamela was still inside the house, finishing up the details of her visit for the day. I carried the heavy grocery bags through the side door into the kitchen and began putting everything away in the cabinets and refrigerator while listening to the low sound of their voices still drifting from the living room area. Eventually, Pamela said her goodbyes to Thomas, gathered her things, and left through the front door, giving me a quick wave as she walked to her car parked at the curb. Later that same evening, after Thomas had gone to bed earlier than usual due to the day's fatigue, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the lights dimmed and reviewed the complete recording from the afternoon session. The footage played back the exact sequence I had glimpsed live on my phone: the deliberate arrangement of the bottles, the careful measuring with the spoon, the slow stirring process, and the extended time spent focused on the supplements at the table. I watched the entire clip through from start to finish twice, pausing at several key moments to zoom in and ensure I had not overlooked any small action or exchange. The device had performed exactly as the product description promised, delivering a steady, clear, and uninterrupted view of the living room and counter area, without any technical problems or gaps in the recording. The decision to install the hidden camera had grown directly out of many months of quiet, accumulating doubts that I could no longer set aside. Now that the step had been taken and the first set of footage was saved on my phone, a different kind of tension settled over the house for me personally. I understood clearly that I could never unsee the images the camera had captured that afternoon, and yet I also realized that a single visit's recording alone might not provide enough information to reach any firm conclusions about the full picture. Nevertheless, the straightforward act of placing that small, inconspicuous device in our living room had already begun to change something fundamental in the way I now perceived the regular visits that continued to take place inside our own home. The next afternoon, everything changed in a single moment. I left the house again for another quick grocery run, taking the same familiar route through the quiet suburban streets of Omaha. The sky hung heavy with typical gray Nebraska clouds, and the traffic remained light as I drove toward the neighborhood supermarket. My phone rested in the cup holder with the camera app running quietly in the background, the live feed showing nothing out of the ordinary while Pamela was still inside with Thomas. I kept my focus on the road, quickly picking up the few items on my short list and completing the checkout process without any unnecessary delay. On the drive home, I decided to review the recorded portion from earlier that day. I opened the full clip on my phone, holding the device in my left hand while keeping my right hand steady on the steering wheel and my eyes mostly fixed on the road ahead. The footage began with ordinary conversation between Pamela and Thomas at the coffee table, their voices calm and casual as they discussed everyday family topics. Then the scene shifted as Pamela reached for the row of supplement containers lined up neatly on the table surface. What happened next made my entire body go cold. Instead of simply measuring the usual powders, Pamela paused, glanced quickly toward the hallway as if listening for any movement, and then pulled a small unmarked packet from deep inside her bag. She tore the packet open with deliberate care and poured a fine white substance directly into the glass of water she had prepared. She stirred the mixture slowly and thoroughly with a spoon until the powder dissolved completely without leaving any visible trace. Throughout the entire process, she continued speaking to Thomas in the same relaxed, reassuring tone, handing him the glass with a warm smile and encouraging him to drink it right away for maximum benefit. The hidden camera captured every single deliberate action in sharp detail, the careful hiding of the empty packet back into her bag, the quick scan of the room, and the way she watched closely as he finished every last drop without any hesitation. The shock hit me like a physical force. My hands began shaking uncontrollably on the steering wheel, causing the car to drift slightly toward the right shoulder of the road. The realization crashed over me with terrifying clarity. This was not innocent help from a caring sister. This was deliberate tampering with my husband's supplements, something harmful being added while he sat there trusting her completely. My mind flashed through all the weeks of her increasing visits, the unexplained worsening of his symptoms, and the subtle questions about the lake house that had seemed harmless before. In that single horrifying instant, every piece fell into a dark and disturbing pattern. I slammed on the brakes hard and pulled the car over to the side of the road immediately, the tires grinding against the loose gravel on the shoulder. My heart pounded so violently I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The phone screen continued playing the footage on loop, showing Pamela calmly cleaning up the table and acting as though nothing unusual had taken place. I sat frozen in the driver's seat for several long seconds, staring at the video in complete disbelief, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The quiet suburban road around me suddenly felt distant and unreal, as if the normal world had tilted sharply away from me in that moment. Without allowing myself any more time to hesitate, I dialed 911 with fingers that refused to stay steady. The operator answered on the second ring, her voice professional and calm. I forced myself to speak as clearly as possible despite the panic rising rapidly in my throat, explaining that I had just witnessed someone tampering with my husband's medication through a hidden camera inside our home. I gave our exact address in Omaha and described the situation as quickly and accurately as I could, mentioning that my husband was currently at the house with the person responsible. The operator remained steady, asking specific questions about Thomas's current condition and Pamela's exact location at that moment. I answered every question while keeping my eyes on the phone screen, telling them she was still inside with him right now. They assured me that police units were being dispatched immediately and instructed me to stay on the line until officers arrived at the scene. The following 45 minutes stretched into what felt like the longest and most agonizing period of my life. I remained parked on the side of the road, the engine running to provide some warmth against the cooling afternoon air. I kept glancing repeatedly at the live feed on my phone, watching as Pamela continued sitting with Thomas in the living room, chatting in her usual calm manner while he rested on the couch. Every minute that ticked by increased the sick fear that something irreversible might happen before the police could reach our house. I thought briefly about calling Nicholas or Hannah for support, but decided against it, choosing instead to wait until I had official help on the way. The operator stayed on the line the entire time, offering steady reassurance and asking occasional follow-up questions to keep me focused and calm. Finally, flashing red and blue lights appeared in my rearview mirror as 2 police cruisers approached from behind. An officer walked up to my window, and I immediately showed him the footage on my phone, explaining the full context of what I had witnessed in as much detail as possible. His expression shifted noticeably the moment he saw the video. He radioed for additional units to proceed directly to our residential address, while another officer remained with me at the side of the road. They advised me to follow their vehicles back to the house at a safe distance, keeping my speed steady and staying behind them. When our small convoy arrived at the house, the situation was already unfolding rapidly. Officers were at the front door knocking firmly, and Pamela's car remained parked in the driveway exactly where it had been. I watched from inside my own vehicle as they entered the house, the live feed on my phone now showing the real-time activity inside our living room. Thomas looked confused and disoriented when the police began explaining the reason for their visit. Pamela's face went visibly pale as the officers asked her to step outside for questioning. The entire process moved with professional efficiency, with one team securing the supplement containers and glasses as potential evidence, while others took initial statements from everyone present at the scene. 45 minutes after I had first pulled over on the side of the road in panic, the situation had escalated from a private family suspicion to active police involvement right at our own doorstep. The heavy weight of what I had discovered through that hidden camera settled over me as I stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward the house, knowing with absolute certainty that nothing in our family life would ever return to the way it had been before this afternoon. The following morning brought a new wave of urgency. Thomas's condition had deteriorated rapidly overnight. He woke up extremely weak, barely able to sit up in bed without assistance, and complained of severe dizziness combined with intense nausea that made it impossible for him to keep even water down. I helped him to the bathroom multiple times, noticing how pale his face had become and how unsteady his steps were despite holding onto my arm for support. By early morning, his breathing had become noticeably shallow and labored, prompting me to call an ambulance without any further hesitation. Paramedics arrived within minutes, assessed his vital signs on the spot, and decided immediately to transport him to the nearest emergency room at a major hospital in Omaha for urgent evaluation and treatment. The ride to the hospital felt tense and surreal as I followed the ambulance in my own car through the morning traffic. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly while my mind raced with worry about what the doctors would find. When we reached the emergency department, medical staff moved Thomas into a private bay right away and began running a full series of urgent tests, including comprehensive blood work, chest scans, neurological checks, and continuous monitoring of his heart rate and oxygen levels. I waited anxiously in the hallway outside, pacing back and forth on the polished floor, while nurses periodically came out to update me on his current status and reassure me that the team was working as quickly as possible. After several long hours of intensive examination and laboratory analysis, the attending physician finally called me into a quiet consultation room away from the busy emergency area. He explained the results with a serious but professional expression on his face. "We have identified a foreign substance in your husband's supplements," he said clearly. The levels detected are significant enough to fully explain the rapid decline in his health over the past several weeks. This is not a natural illness, age-related condition, or simple side effect. It appears to be the result of intentional tampering with his medication routine. The doctor continued in detail, describing how the substance had affected Thomas's nervous system, balance, and overall physiological stability, emphasizing that the prompt arrival at the hospital had likely prevented even more serious and potentially life-threatening complications. He recommended immediate admission for close observation, intravenous fluids, and a treatment plan designed to help flush the harmful substance from his system safely and effectively. The confirmation landed heavily, even though part of me had already braced for this kind of news after the events of the previous day. I stood there absorbing the doctor's words carefully, feeling a complicated mix of relief that Thomas was now receiving proper medical care in a controlled environment, and a deep, burning anger at how this had been allowed to happen inside our own home for so long. The physician assured me the hospital would coordinate with law enforcement if requested, but he also stressed the importance of gathering all available evidence quickly to support any further investigation. Later that afternoon, Nicholas arrived at the hospital first. Our son walked quickly down the long hallway, his face clearly etched with worry and fatigue after I had called him earlier with the update about his father's emergency admission. We sat together in the quiet waiting area just outside Thomas's room, speaking in low voices so as not to disturb other patients nearby. I showed him the key footage from the previous day on my phone and explained exactly what I had witnessed on the road, along with the doctor's findings from the morning tests. Nicholas listened intently without interrupting, his expression growing darker and more determined with each passing minute of the conversation. "Mom, this is far more serious than we initially thought," he said quietly but firmly. "Dad trusted her completely, and she took advantage of that trust in the worst possible way. We cannot let this slide any further. We need to make sure the police have every piece of evidence available so they can handle this properly." Hannah joined the discussion a short while later through a video call from California. She had booked a flight immediately after hearing the news and appeared on the screen looking exhausted but resolute. The three of us spoke together as a family, with Hannah asking detailed, pointed questions about the exact nature of the substance the doctors had identified and the full extent of the evidence captured by the camera. "Mom, you did the right thing by taking action when you did," she said with clear conviction in her voice. "Now we have to follow through completely and without hesitation. Pamela crossed a serious line that cannot be ignored or forgiven, especially while Dad is lying in that hospital bed fighting to regain his strength." Nicholas nodded in strong agreement, adding that he would personally help organize all the digital evidence, including precise timestamps from the camera app and any additional records from the hospital staff. We continued the important conversation in the hospital cafeteria over several cups of coffee, carefully weighing the next practical steps as a united front. I described how the police had responded the previous evening, but had not yet received the complete medical documentation or the full set of recordings. Nicholas offered to compile everything into a clear, organized file for the detectives, while Hannah suggested contacting a family lawyer as soon as possible to understand our legal rights regarding the lake house and any protections needed for Thomas's long-term recovery and financial security. The discussion felt heavy with emotion, but also necessary and empowering, transforming our private family crisis into a coordinated plan aimed at protecting Thomas and ensuring full accountability for what had happened. By late afternoon, I made the final, firm decision with the full support of both our children. I contacted the police department once again and provided a complete, detailed statement including all saved camera footage, accurate timestamps, the official hospital medical report confirming the presence of the foreign substance, and the doctor's professional assessment. The detective assigned to the case listened attentively over the phone and assured me that they would move forward promptly with a full investigation based on this new, concrete evidence from the hospital. He mentioned that cases involving tampering with medication in this manner carried serious legal consequences under Nebraska law, particularly when they resulted in emergency hospitalization and ongoing health damage. Thomas remained stable but still quite weak in his hospital room upstairs, resting under continuous medical supervision with monitors beeping steadily beside his bed. I sat quietly beside him for a long time that evening, holding his hand gently and watching the rhythmic lines on the screens while he slept. Nicholas stayed at the hospital with me for several more hours, offering quiet support and helping with small practical tasks, while Hannah remained in constant contact through messages and calls, providing encouragement and updates from her end. The atmosphere inside the hospital felt clinical and cold under the bright fluorescent lights, yet it also brought a strange, tentative sense of relief that Thomas was finally safe and receiving the professional care he desperately needed, far removed from the source of the problem that had been affecting him for so long. The confirmation from the doctors and the clear decision to report everything fully and officially to the police marked a significant turning point in the entire situation. What had begun as quiet, growing suspicion within the walls of our suburban home had now evolved into an official medical emergency and a formal legal matter, with Thomas fighting to recover in a hospital bed, while the truth about the supplements and the repeated visits slowly but steadily came into the full light of day. Later that same evening, the investigation moved forward quickly. The detective I had spoken with earlier arrived at the hospital with 2 other officers to collect additional statements and coordinate with the medical team. After reviewing the doctor's report and the camera footage I provided, they decided to act without further delay. They informed me that a warrant had been issued and that they would be going to Pamela's house that night to question her directly and collect any additional evidence. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and resolve as I watched them leave the hospital floor. I stayed with Thomas until visiting hours ended, then drove home alone through the dark Omaha streets. The house felt unnaturally quiet when I walked inside. The living room still showed signs of the earlier police presence, a few items slightly out of place from when they had secured the supplement bottles as evidence. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at my phone and waiting for any update from the detective. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. It was the detective. He told me they had gone to Pamela's residence and taken her into custody after she initially denied any involvement. The officers had found additional unmarked packets similar to the ones seen in the camera footage hidden in a drawer in her kitchen. Pamela had been transported to the police station for formal questioning and processing. The detective confirmed that she was being held on suspicion of tampering with medication resulting in serious bodily harm. The news left me sitting motionless at the table. I had known this moment was coming, yet hearing the words out loud still felt surreal. Pamela Thomas's own sister was now in police custody because of what she had done to him. I thought about all the years of family gatherings, holidays, and casual visits, and how none of it had prepared me for this kind of betrayal. I called Nicholas first. He answered on the first ring, still awake and waiting for news. When I told him Pamela had been taken into custody, he let out a long breath and said, "It's the right thing. Mom, she can't be allowed to hurt anyone else." We spoke for several minutes about what would happen next, with Nicholas offering to come over early the next morning to help with anything needed at the house. His voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying anger and disappointment. Next, I dialed Hannah. She picked up immediately despite the late hour in California. I repeated the update about Pamela's arrest and the evidence found at her home. Hannah's response was direct and emotional. "Good. She needs to face consequences for what she did to Dad. We've all been too trusting for too long." We talked about how to break the news to Thomas gently when he was stronger. and Hannah promised to fly in as soon as she could arrange time off work. After the calls, I tried to rest, but sleep came slowly. The house felt different now, emptier, heavier with the knowledge of what had happened inside its walls. I walked through the living room once more, looking at the spot where the camera had been placed. The small adapter was still there, a silent witness to everything that had unfolded. The next morning, the detective called again with more details. Pamela had been formally charged and remained in custody. She had reportedly given a partial statement, but continued to deny adding anything harmful, claiming instead that she was only trying to help Thomas feel better. The detective warned me that the case would likely move to court and that we would need to prepare for testimony if it went that far. He also mentioned that the lake house could become part of the legal proceedings if any financial motive was established. I returned to the hospital mid-morning. Thomas was more alert than the day before, though still weak and connected to monitors. The nurses had reduced some of the medication, and he was able to sit up with support. When I entered the room, he looked at me with tired eyes and asked what had happened. I sat beside his bed and told him the truth as gently as I could, that the doctors had found a foreign substance in his supplements, that the police had been called, and that Pamela was now in custody because of evidence from the camera I had installed. Thomas listened quietly, his face showing a range of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a deep sadness. "Pamela," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the hospital air. "My own sister." He stared at the ceiling for a long time, processing the information. I held his hand and didn't push for any immediate reaction. He eventually said he needed time to think, but he understood why I had taken the steps I did. The conversation left both of us exhausted, yet it also felt like a necessary clearing of the air between us. Nicholas arrived at the hospital shortly after and joined us in the room. He spoke calmly with his father, Sue, reassuring him that the family was united and that the focus now was on Thomas's recovery. Hannah called in again on video, adding her support and telling her father she would be there soon. For the first time in weeks, Thomas seemed to realize the full extent of what had been happening and how much his health had been compromised by someone he trusted completely. The day continued with more updates from the police. They had secured additional evidence from Pamela's home and were building a stronger case. I answered their questions honestly when they called, providing context about the frequency of visits and the changes in Thomas's health. Each conversation reinforced the reality that this was no longer just a family matter. It had become a criminal case with real consequences. By evening, Thomas was resting more peacefully. I sat beside his bed again, watching him sleep and reflecting on how quickly our quiet life in Omaha had been upended. The arrest of Pamela marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of a much more difficult one, dealing with the legal process. Thomas's physical recovery, and the emotional fallout from such a deep betrayal within the family. 2 weeks later, the legal process began to deliver its verdict. The courthouse in Omaha was quieter than I expected on the morning of the hearing. I arrived early with Nicholas and Hannah, who had flown in the night before. We sat together in the front row of the small courtroom, dressed simply and trying to remain composed despite the tension in the air. Thomas was still recovering at home under strict doctor's orders and did not attend the hearing, but we promised to update him fully afterward. The judge entered and the session began with a methodical review of all the evidence presented by the prosecution, the time-stamped camera recordings showing the tampering, the hospital laboratory results confirming the presence of the foreign substance in Thomas's supplements, the unmarked packets discovered during the search of Pamela's home, and the detailed medical testimony explaining how the substance had caused serious harm to Thomas's nervous system and overall health. Pamela sat at the defense table, looking pale and tense, avoiding any eye contact with our side of the room. Her lawyer attempted to argue that her actions were misguided attempts to help her brother, and that any substance added was intended only as an additional supplement. but the evidence was overwhelming and clear. The prosecutor presented the case methodically, highlighting the pattern of increasing visits that perfectly coincided with the worsening of Thomas's symptoms, the chemical analysis from the hospital, and the financial motive tied to the lake house property. The judge listened attentively, asking occasional clarifying questions, and ultimately ruled that the actions constituted intentional tampering with medication that had resulted in serious bodily injury. The sentence was delivered in a calm, measured tone. Pamela was found guilty on the main charges and sentenced to 18 months in state prison, followed by 2 years of probation. In addition, the court permanently revoked any potential claim she might have had to the lake house that Thomas had inherited from his parents, recognizing the clear financial motive behind her actions. The property would remain solely in Thomas's name, fully protected from any future legal challenges. When the gavel came down, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence for several seconds. Pamela was led away by court officers without turning to look at us. Outside the courthouse, the three of us stood together in the cold Nebraska wind. Nicholas spoke first, his voice low but firm. "It's finally over, Mom. She can't hurt Dad or anyone else anymore." Hannah nodded, squeezing my hand. "We protected what mattered most. That's what counts now." I felt a heavy weight lift slightly from my shoulders, but it was quickly replaced by a deep, lingering sadness. This was not the kind of ending any family should ever have to face. When I returned home that afternoon, I sat with Thomas in the living room. He had been resting on the couch, slowly regaining strength day by day. I told him the full outcome of the hearing the guilty verdict, the prison sentence, ifis, the probation period, and the permanent loss of any rights Pamela might have claimed to the lake house. Thomas listened quietly, his eyes distant and filled with a mix of disbelief and sorrow. "My own sister," he said softly after a long pause. "I never thought it would come to this." We sat together in silence for a long time, holding hands and watching the afternoon light slowly fade through the windows. There were no tears, just a quiet acceptance of the reality we now faced. That evening, I made a quiet but firm decision. I blocked Pamela's number on my phone and removed her from all family contacts and group chats. There would be no visits, no calls, no letters, and no attempts at reconciliation. The betrayal had cut too deep, and the harm to Thomas had been too real and too dangerous. Nicholas and Hannah fully supported the choice when I told them. We agreed as a family that some lines, once crossed so deliberately, could not be redrawn or forgiven. Weeks passed, and life slowly began to find a new kind of normal. Thomas continued his recovery with regular physical therapy sessions and checkups at the hospital. The dizziness and fatigue gradually lessened, and he started taking short walks around the neighborhood again, sometimes with me by his side. The lake house remained ours, untouched by the legal battle, and we began talking occasionally about driving up there together when he felt strong enough for the trip. I still catch myself thinking about that small hidden camera from time to time, the unassuming device that ultimately changed the course of our lives. It forced me to confront a painful truth I never wanted to accept, that even the closest blood relatives can harbor motives that cause real harm to those they claim to love. The entire experience taught me to trust my own instincts more fully, to question patterns that feel wrong even when they come from someone I thought I knew well, and to protect the people I love without hesitation when something feels off, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Our family is smaller now in some ways, but stronger and more honest in the ways that truly matter. We speak more openly with one another, check in more frequently, and value the quiet, ordinary days we once took for granted. Thomas and I sit on the porch most evenings now, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes down the street, grateful for the second chance we were given after everything that happened. The betrayal from Pamela left lasting scars on all of us, but it also served as a stark reminder that real family is not defined only by blood. It is built on trust that must be earned and protected every single day, not simply assumed. And sometimes, the hardest but most necessary choice a person can make is to cut ties completely, and without regret when that trust is deliberately and dangerously broken.